for the Agile community. www.Agile.FM. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Agile.FM, and today I have a guest with me I always wanted to have on this podcast, but the stars have not aligned until today. It is Esther Derby. Esther Derby is an author of two books. One of them is, I remember when it was released in 2006, Agile Retrospectives, I think a book that changed many people's lives. Esther is a founding member of the Scrum Alliance, board member of the Agile Alliance. She probably doesn't need an introduction to the Agile community, but I'm doing it anyways. And she holds a master's in organizational leadership, and these pretty much are the topics we would love to talk about today. So first of all, welcome to the podcast, Esther.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
Right, and we also have your dog, Izzy, in the background as well.
Yes, she's busy right now, but she might be barking.
She might be barking, so just...
at a certain point.
Yes. All right, here we go. All right, so...
There we go, she's barking already.
I jinxed it.
Oh well,
right? Agile Retrospectives is a book, as I said, that was released in 2006, and it's a great toolbox of... I think for everybody. And I think it's a stunning book for one reason. It's not prescriptive. It's a book that people can just put their retrospectives together. You have a theme to how these retrospectives are being aligned, but the book itself doesn't say this is how retrospectives are going to be performed for the next 20 years. So, exactly, right? What has happened, and what do you think happened since 2006, since the release of retrospectives, to all these retrospectives out there in this world?
Well, I don't know about all of them. But I have heard some pretty dramatic stories about how people have been able to use this regular cadence of reflecting to make significant improvements in the way they're working together, in the quality of their work, in their sense of agency that, we can actually make changes. Mm-hmm. So I've heard some really terrific stories. And sadly, I've also heard stories about, people who are forced to do retrospectives in a sort of ritualistic way, mm-hmm. and people who do retrospectives, but they're never allowed to have any time to actually make improvements. Mm-hmm. And I've heard stories about people who are still doing retrospectives that consist of saying, what are we doing well? What should we do differently? Mm-hmm. So there's still room for people to move into this cadence of reflection and improving. I
have experiences that are even further out there. Some teams skip retrospectives altogether, right? And they're like, I don't even know how to perform them. And that's when I usually put your book into their hands and, and say, it's like, you need to read this.
That's kind of you. But although I would say if people are having retrospectives where they are not given any time to actually make improvements, or where it's used to blame people, or the manager is checking in to make sure who's not, doing what he thinks they should be doing, then I think they should probably skip them. Mm-hmm. So if they're being used for blame, or they're not used, then better not to have one.
Yeah.
At all, than to have one that's contributes to blame or is not a good use of people's time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, how do you feel about in Scrum? Everything is time boxed. So is the retrospective. How do you feel about that time box? Just curious.
Well, I think time boxes can be useful. I don't think they're the thing that will save everything, but what I often find is that people allocate so little time to reflection and improving to their retrospectives that it's not surprising that they're not getting much value out of them. Mm-hmm. If you're only allocating half an hour to think about a month's worth of work or 2 weeks worth of work, it's mm-hmm. not surprising to me that you're not getting beneath the surface.
Mm-hmm. You probably have seen the latest version of the Scrum Guide, which was released maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, early November 17.
Actually, I haven't looked at it.
Right. So there is a new statement in there which emphasizes actually retrospective items to be part of the sprint backlog for the future sprint.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've been saying that for years.
Awesome.
That if your improvement actions aren't part of your real plan, if they're part of some separate plan, nothing happens with them. So they have to be considered part of your real work, not some separate category of some, because those secondary plans just are always overtaken by the need to deliver features. So I agree that it's really necessary for it to be part of the plan for the work for the sprint.
Awesome, right. So that was retrospectives, and it was a long time ago. But today you're focusing on bringing agility to organizations, and you state that the environment, culture, and organizational dynamics are directly linked to the level of success. Why is working with people so much harder than with machines?
Well, they're not deterministic.
Why does it entertain you so much in the cultural and organizational dynamics in particular?
Well, people are endlessly fascinating. I mean, on an individual level, and people are just very, very interesting, and it's very rewarding to interact with people and get to know people for the most part. And in groups, the dynamics and the complexity of those situations and how the environment interacts with people it's just totally fascinating. And my experience is that in most organizations, people focus on let's get the right people, and then let's get these people to work to the maximum efficiency, versus looking at the environment that we've created for people. And I think that's missing it's missing half of the equation, because the environment has such a big impact on people's work. Actually, Kurt Lewin has an equation which I'm quite fond of, which is behavior is a function of the person and the environment. And I think that is often overlooked. So, for example, I got a call from someone who was telling me about a team that was just demotivated, and he was wondering how he could motivate these individuals, and he was wondering if they just were kind of had a character flaw because they weren't motivated even they were being paid. And I started asking questions, and it turned out that these poor people were working on a task that was really not very compelling. They were updating legalese on pages for a large organization. They worked in a basement room with no windows.
Oh my God!
They had no connection to the people who actually approved these web pages, and half the time they'd finish something and they'd contact the person, and the person would say, I can't get to that for 6 months, and so there was nothing in their environment that provided motivation. They were divorced from the end customer. Their work was compartmentalized, so it didn't really touch on the whole or a bigger purpose. And their physical environment was terrible. So.
But they were getting paid.
Well, they were getting paid, so of course they should be giving their full effort. Well, I think that's a faulty way of thinking. People are motivated when things are interesting and there is some larger purpose. And they were being dutiful. It's not like they weren't doing their job. They just weren't highly motivated. So in that case, there were some limits about what they could do, since the design of the work was such that it was intrinsically not particularly motivating. But there were other things they could have done to make the environment more hospitable to humans.
What do you think are the factors for a higher morale? Obviously, it's not the pay, but what increases the motivation of doing a stellar job on a specific project?
Having a compelling purpose, one that is meaningful, that is challenging, that that is clear enough that people can actually grasp what it is to do is a big part of it. Mm-hmm. And then having the means to do that. I was talking to a group last week about the conditions for engagement and motivation, and it's really understanding the why and having some boundaries, but not having the how be dictated.
Right.
So
I see that as a common theme, right? The how part. When you tell specialists, experts how to do things, not very motivating.
Oh, terribly unmotivating.
Yeah.
And a waste of capability, of human potential.
Right. I'm doing it because somebody said that's how they want it.
Yeah. Sad.
Yeah.
Sad.
How do you go home at 5 o'clock? How do you feel?
Yeah. How do you make it until 5 o'clock without feeling dispirited?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the bigger question.
Mm-hmm. Well, so this was from a moods level. That was the low point of our podcast here today, right? So we reached the low point. We're gonna go now to a higher level. We're gonna go to success. We're gonna go to success in organizations. Obviously, you're spending a lot of time with organizations of introducing or cultivating agility. What I hear when I'm speaking with people, they're like, yeah, I can sense that Agile is making a difference. I can sense that people do things differently, and it might feel like we're doing more, but how do we measure success, and how do you measure success in an organization? Saying like, this is since the introduction of Agile, like X years ago, we have seen the following changes, and where do you what kind of, I don't know if there are metrics you're using or things you're observing where you would say there is an evidence of success?
Well, I think there's a lot of ways you can look at success. You can look at, are we delivering products to our customers that our customers value? Has the cost of maintaining our product gone down because we're delivering fewer bugs and higher quality code? Mm-hmm. Are we financially in a better situation because our products are more successful? So that's sort of the business side of things. But you can also look at what's our turnover? Mm. Has our turnover gone down? Has our sick time gone down? Because those speak to, we are creating a workplace where people want to stay, they feel challenged, they feel valued. It talks to reduced levels of stress, mm-hmm. which is directly tied to absences from work. Mm-hmm. So you could be looking at those things. Mm-hmm. Some people are doing happiness indexes, and those may or may not be valid, but the turnover and the sick days mm-hmm. directly relate to how people feel about their work and whether they're working at a sustainable pace. And they also speak to the financial results of the company, because both of those things are quite expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my dog is making a lot of noise in the background. I hope it's not coming through in the podcast.
No, I don't hear anything. And
oh, good, because it's not me making those sort of grunting and chewing noises. I promise you, it's not me.
I don't hear anything so far, right? So, so what you're saying is about sustainable pace, and it's about stress level. And so on. For many organizations that are new to Agile, most of them are actually new. It's really the opposite. The stress increases with certain processes being implemented. You see teams really feeling like pressured by time boxes, getting more work done. It's the opposite of what you're describing here, right?
Well, I think the process of a big change is always stressful in and of itself. Mm-hmm. That's. It just is. So one of the things I try to do is introduce things more gradually and more slowly so that there's not a big perturbation in the system and so that people are not experiencing huge amounts of stress related to the change itself. Mm-hmm. I get worried when people talk about feeling more pressured and more time-boxed. And that makes me concerned about how people are understanding the principles of Agile development and how they are understanding the need for autonomy and buy-in from the people doing the work.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that is related also to management, leadership in an organization having wrong expectations of what Agile would do for them as an organization?
Well, are you familiar with the phrase "bless their hearts"? Bless their hearts.
Yes.
It's common in the South. You know, once you've said "bless their hearts," then you can say just about anything. Like, "Oh, bless her heart. That dress makes her look as big as a barn." So, bless their hearts. I think a lot of executives seem to think that change is a step function. That you implement a change and you will immediately have an increase in productivity. Mm-hmm. And that's not the case. It is almost always the case that when you bring in some change that requires people to think differently and behave differently and have different relationships and learn different skills, there's actually a dip in people's productivity and performance.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Right. So yeah, I think there is a mismatch between the reality of change and the expectations of the benefits of Agile. Mm-hmm. I also think that a lot of places that attempt to, and I'm using this word in quotes, install Agile on the team level, but don't look at how work flows through the organization in general. Mm-hmm. And they don't necessarily examine, what are the patterns that are getting in our way and what holds those patterns in place. Mm-hmm. So it's in some sense superimposing a process without looking at what the underlying processes are and whether they're compatible and what needs to shift in order to move towards something more effective. Mm-hmm.
What do you? I mean, you work with a ton of leaders out there. What do you hear from their end? What is from a coaching consulting perspective? What do you hear from them? I mean, we have explored on the team level. There's a lot of material out there on how to introduce Agile on that team level you were just describing, right? Which is essential. I feel like it's essential. But what do you hear from leaders about the flip, the change, the installing Agile? Yeah.
Well, I the ones that I work with closely recognize that it involves change on their part as well as on the team's part. Mm-hmm. In some ways, it involves changing the questions they ask about how things are going. It involves shifting the way they focus their attention on, individuals or teams versus on how work flows through the system. Mm-hmm. And that's, it's a different way of thinking than we have been taught, right? And very often people, when they've grown up in a system and they have experienced success within a system, it's not particularly easy to shift that thinking. Mm-hmm. And most of our organizations are really designed in the image of a machine so even when they do shift their thinking, sometimes it's difficult to make change happen within these organizations. This is one of the reasons I advocate small changes. Because they don't create chaos and they don't freak mm-hmm. people out. Right. It kind of eases things and it gives people time to learn mm-hmm. as they go and shift their thinking as they go.
Mm-hmm. So you have on your website, I found a chart. I think it's a few years ago you released this, and it's like the environment for Agile success. What is, and one of the things is really, I mean, you're using the M word on that chart, like management, right? Where a lot of people try to stay away these days. For me, it's like, management, leadership, there's morale, there's clarity, capability, decision-making,
Sure.
group effectiveness. Could you, just for the listeners visiting your site, interested in that model, why do they exist? Why did you put these things together, and why are they exactly like this? I'm super excited about morale, for example.
Well, I think all of those things are sort of mutually reinforcing. And I'm trying to get to that page, so I'm looking at the same thing you're looking at.
Yeah. So we have like in the inner core, we have the values, the mission.
Yep. And of course, I just redid my website, so I don't know where anything is anymore. So the way people think about their organization is often like a machine, right? That's kind of the dominant image, whether it's consciously held or not, about an organization. But it's really far more complex than that, and there's, we don't have a direct causation. So all of these things are entwined. Everything touches everything. And these are some of the areas I look at in terms of the functional dynamics of an organization to understand where there is room to shift something so that, we can move towards something more effective. So the way people are doing management, what management practices are in place, and how people think about that job will affect how people are making decisions. It will affect morale. It will affect all sorts of things. I have lately started thinking about it in a way that distills it to what managers need to be paying attention to is clarity. Do people know what the work is, how it fits into the bigger picture, what the purpose is? Conditions, so do people actually have the means to do their work? And then constraints or boundaries, so that people know where their autonomy is. And when they bump up against something, they know they need to, we can't make this decision, so we need to go have a conversation. Which are in some ways the essential factors which we can use to influence the patterns that emerge in a complex system.
Which every organization would fall into that category, I would assume, right?
Yeah, sometimes there's work within an organization that isn't complex, but the organizations in themselves generally are.
That's right, yeah. So from an organizational perspective, I mean, you've been doing this for many years, right? Are there any indicators for you when you walk first day, you're meeting with a new organization, new customer, you walk into this organization, is there anything you take away on day number one where you think like, wow, like things you notice instantly for this, there is Agile going on here, yes or no? It's like, are there any kind of key things you commonly see out there where you feel like an organization needs help in a specific area?
Well, I would say that process happens long before I arrive on the first day.
Okay.
And sometimes that process results in me saying, no, I don't think I'm coming. So I guess one of the first things I look for is in those initial conversations, how are people defining the problem? How are the people I'm talking to defining the problem? And how open are they to exploring an alternate definition of the problem, or looking at different sorts of information and how that might inform how they conceive of the issue? Which is speaking to openness and flexibility and willingness to examine conceptions about the organization outside of, oh, we have a team that needs to be faster.
Right. Do you work more with larger organizations, smaller organizations, or doesn't matter for you?
I work with all sizes of organizations.
Yeah.
So, sometimes I work with 30-person companies, and sometimes I work with a division of 5,000 people of a company that's, 60,000 people.
Wow. I've worked with an 8-person company. Very different dynamics than...
very different dynamics. And there's some notable shifts that happen at about 15 and about 30 and about 100.
Mm-hmm. Oh, is that so? Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now, you have written the book we mentioned before, the Agile Retrospectives, together with Diana Larson. And Diana Larson is speaking at the Agile Miami conference, which we're putting together in February. What conferences do you attend these days? I know you speak a lot, right? You go out and do presentations. And I know one of them is actually the AYE conference you're organizing. I'm not sure if you're still organizing it, but
no, actually, we retired that conference a while ago. Although lately there have been a lot of people talking about wanting something like I. Mm-hmm. We realized that in many ways we had met our goals for that conference, so
just
we
retired.
moved on. Mm-hmm. So I speak at a number of conferences every year. I was in Warsaw in October, and I was at a little meetup in London last week.
Nice.
So yeah, I get around.
You get around.
Yeah, and my schedule for 2018 is still taking shape. Mm-hmm. So I know I'll be at the Scrum gathering in Canada. Mm-hmm. And there's some other things that are in discussion.
All right, maybe we have an opportunity to get you to New York at some point.
It's possible.
Possible, right?
It's more than possible.
Get you to the Agile Day in New York, or we align you with another conference maybe down the road. February in Miami, by the way, very nice. What conferences do you see currently trending, like from your perspective, right? The topics you're writing and you're passionate about. Are there any kind of conferences, Agile 2018, like the typical flagship 5-day conferences for the broad masses, right? You go there and you speak, but is there anything that stands out where you would say this is a must-go for you?
Oh, well, there's a very long list. I mean, I actually really love a lot of the smaller regional conferences. Mm-hmm. I really love them. They get a sort of different variety of speakers, and you often have much more opportunity to interact with people than at a huge conference.
True.
So, I really liked the Path to Agility conference. Mm-hmm. I went to that. I spoke at that last spring, and I think they did a fantastic job putting the schedule together. Mm-hmm. There were topics that were outside the norm and that were interesting and compelling. Agile and Beyond.
I've heard of that one, yeah.
Yeah, so it's Midwestern Conference. They do a really nice job. Mm-hmm. So some of these smaller regional conferences, I think, are really terrific. Mm-hmm. Really terrific.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. It's like I visited the Agile Alliance website for like local events because we put the Miami thing on. I was like, what else is going on out there? And it's just simply amazing. Like, I mean, obviously for me, it's like East Coast. I'm watching what's going on the East Coast, and then like more like in detail. But there's just an amazing amount of conferences and small regional gatherings going on. It's really fantastic. Now, to the end of our podcast here, Esther, you wrote tons of articles. I think over 100 articles, 2 books. I'm not sure. Many. Yeah, and I'm not sure if you're working on another book or not. But would be more interested right now. Is like, what are you reading these days?
Well, I am working on another book.
You do?
Yeah, based on my a talk I've been doing called 6 Rules for Change, mm-hmm. which is a more complexity and human-informed view of change than the typical deterministic thinking about change. So I'm working on that. What am I reading? I have been reading a book by Jeffrey Pfeffer called Leadership BS.
Huh. Yeah,
which is
title.
about some of the wrong-headed thinking about leadership. I have been. Well, I should get out my little list and tell you what I've been reading.
So it's all business,
Well, no, it's not all business. If you want to know what I've been reading that isn't all business, I've been reading. I've actually been listening to a series called The Saxon Tales.
Oh, wow.
Which is about the time of the consolidation of the English kingdom under Alfred.
Wow.
Yeah. But I've been reading stuff about social network analysis. I've been reading stuff about complexity. I've been reading stuff about social history and the origins of accounting.
Wow. Very, very specific topics, and probably to me totally unrelated, but probably for you they're very related.
To me they're quite related.
Yeah.
Because everything touches everything.
Everything touches everything, right? Well, Esther, thank you so much. I wanted to just get like a feeling here for what you're working on, and we got this amazing info that you're working on another book, the 6 Rules of Change. I'm not sure if that's going to be the title or so, but
no one can ever tell.
Exactly. And but I wanted to thank you just for your time. I wanted to thank you and Issy and for your time. And I have more information on the website on Agile.FM, but your Twitter handle is Esther Derby, just in one, no gaps, no colons, nothing. And people can reach out to you. They can get in touch with you on your website, estherderby.com. And they find links to all these things we discuss on my site, Agile.FM as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's been delightful chatting with you.
Same here. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Agile.FM, the radio for the Agile community. I'm your host, Joe Krebs. If you're interested in more programming and additional podcasts, please go to www.agile.fm. Talk to you soon.